Okay, so we're going to talk about how to set up a course in for iClicker and how to integrate it with Brightspace. Now, what Dan already has done is created an instructor account. And for those who are watching this later, you just go to iClicker.com and create an instructor account. It'll ask you a few questions. You create a username, password, and it'll ask you for your department and your institution. And once you have that, you're now at the stage where Dan is. So, Dan, if you could go back up to the screen you were at just a minute ago in terms of setting up a course. Okay, so let's say once you created an account, you're here. So now you would sign in because it looks like you're signed out now. So sign
I
in
think I'm
at the
already,
top
oh, okay. Sign
as an
in,
instructor.
instructor, got it.
Okay, and then it puts you through something that looks sort of like what we'll be using later. So the first thing to do is to create a course. So you would go over to the left and choose create a new course. And then you have well, the first thing you have the option about is creating a full course, which allows you to do all the polling. It'll do attendance if you choose, but it will also let you ask multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and all those other types. So let's set up the full course. The
Okay.
attendance only will only let you have students use it for attendance, and it's not ideal for that, but attendance is free. The college pays $4 per student, no matter how many classes they're using otherwise. So once you choose your college, you type in Oswego, and it will give you a list of all the Oswego choices, which I think is just one now. It may still have the high school in there. Choose your discipline from the drop down, and there's always other if it doesn't fit. Put in the name of your course, put in the starting date of the course, which will be sometime in August. And then the ending date, it doesn't really matter when it is, as long as it's after your last use of it. And now here, let me see, it's a kind of small print, so let me see. Uh,
Enrollment. Students can search for and self-enroll or must be invited to the course.
yeah, use that first option. They're actually going to be automatically put in it, but this will do the same thing.
Okay.
Because they can select the course and join that way. So now the clicker ID is if you're using a the course ID would be the number. So that would be music, whatever.
Oh, okay.
So,
I did course name is Recording Tech 1, MUS 382.
mhm,
And the term is this fall.
okay.
Okay. Oops.
And now
Fall.
you don't have to do the next part. In fact, even this is optional, but you could choose that if you're doing multiple sections of the course, you'll have one for each. And there it is helpful if you put in the days and times. So it's up to
Okay.
you. If you know the times of meeting, you could put that in, or you could just skip that entirely.
Um, Let me make sure I'm not putting in the wrong. Oops. When do we
It
start? The
makes students feel
24th?
better if they see that the time matches the time
Okay,
they're actually in
I'll
class.
do my first section. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 12:40. I'm going to go back to where I was. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Um,
And then you can either type it in or scroll
Type it in,
through.
yeah. 12:40 p.m.
Yeah, probably PM.
Um, okay. Hopefully I can just do that. Oh, and one more.
Yeah, easy with Tuesday, Thursday classes.
Yeah, uh, p.m. Okay.
And that's
Um,
all you do need to do on the first screen, and that's identifying the class. And so now what you would do is you would go up and choose create,
okay.
and that will define the course in the system. But the next thing you want to do is to do some settings on that. And if you select the course, there should be an option of settings. There it is. Okay.
Okay.
We can skip that. It
Okay.
encourages you to download the iClicker Cloud app. You've already done that. If
Yep.
you're going to be using a Podium computer, it's already installed. but it's probably not a bad idea to download it if it's your first time anyway, so you can play around with it on your own computer. If you're going to use your own computer, you do need to download that. Well, you don't need to, but it works a whole lot easier. Now, go over to the left and choose Settings.
Okay.
And now this is where you set up all the parameters. The first thing you already kind of have the full course and the name.
Right.
So, it's basically already there. The only additional thing is it gives you the option of sharing a code with students. You don't have to though, because we're integrated with Brightspace. So you
Okay.
don't have to do that additional thing that was added there. But now if you go over to devices, which is the next tab, you have the option of using either mobile devices only or physical clickers. I don't think anyone on campus uses physical clickers anymore, but you could do that if you didn't want students to use the mobile devices. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Now, monitoring student focus is something you could turn on or off. Basically, it will keep track of how long students stay in the app so that if students are using iClicker, but they jump out of it to play a game or watch something or to check their email or do something different, this will keep track of how often they left and what proportion of times they left, etc. You can do that if you like. But there may be times when if you're asking students to look things up or do other things, it might be reasonable for them to be out of focus.
Yeah.
Or if they're doing this on a laptop and they're also taking notes on the laptop, it may appear that they're out of focus when they're actually doing some work.
Yeah.
But, it's when
I
they're
think
doing
I'll
something other than staying in the app, basically.
I
So I
think I'll leave
usually
that one
don't turn that
off.
on, but you
Yeah.
could.
Okay.
And because it does give you a report, but also gives students a report of whether they were in focus and so on. The report will be misleading, could be misleading though.
Yeah. I'll leave that off, I think.
Okay, then the next thing is attendance. And that is if you want to use this for keeping attendance, it can do it automatically since it's for the full course. You can do it by, if you click on that, it will bring you over to a few other settings. And one thing you can do is if you choose to use this for attendance, you could highlight students who have 3 or more unexcused absences, for example, and you can choose the number in there. You could also auto run attendance sometime in the middle of your class, just so that way it will check to see who is connected. On the other hand, if the network connection drops, it might make it appear that they weren't there. I usually don't do this, but I do know people do. And I did try it, I think, one semester. But what happened is students would get upset if they happen to disconnect. I don't have an attendance score, but if you do, this is one way of automatically generate a column of grades for attendance, which you could then load into Brightspace as one of the grades,
Okay.
or as part of the report at least. So that's up to you. The question of requiring a location or not, we talked about a bit
Yep.
in an earlier session. If you do want to require a location, it will, if you have a large enough number of students, some of them will not, their GPS may not pick up their location correctly. And it will also mean that students who might legitimately be trying to connect from elsewhere won't be able to, basically. Or if students are a bit more savvy, they can always spoof their location. So it's up to you if you want to
Right.
require it or not. You can always toggle that on or off at any point in the semester without changing anything.
Okay. Um, so they actually check themselves in as
Well,
opposed to me doing it, right?
what will happen is if you auto run it, it's just going to check to see if they're connected at that time to the app.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Oh, I
so,
see. I see.
so,
All right. Let me think about this one and I'll come back to
and
this
you can
once I
always
get
change
my
it later.
class set up. Okay. All right.
So now the next ones are a bit more essential. Poem.
Okay.
And here, if you're using multiple screens, so if you have 2 monitors or a monitor, if you have the monitor is different than the computer that's connected to it, you have the option of either asking each time which screen you'd like to capture, or automatically capturing the screen where the iClicker toolbar is. That's the thing that floats on top of whatever you're using. When I remember it, I usually choose the second one because that toolbar is something that you usually leave on the screen where the question is that you're sharing with students. So even if you're using, the projector in the class as a separate monitor, or if you're sharing it over Zoom, um, as a second monitor, it's kind of nice to automatically do that. Otherwise, each time it will show the screens you have on your computer, and you have to choose that before you can start the poll. So
Okay.
automatically capturing it is by far the easiest.
Okay.
Now, the next thing is one where people differ on. What will happen is when you do a poll, it does a screen grab. When you start a poll, it will grab whatever is on the screen where the polling app is. So if you have questions embedded in PowerPoint or on Google Slides, it's going to be just doing a screen grab of whatever is there. And you have the choice of sharing that with students. Some people, if they are not using the geofencing, will choose not to share a thumbnail of the captured image when they start the poll, so that students have to physically be in the room to see what the question is. If
Oh,
you choose, well, the captured image. Well, actually, it's not the image preview that matters so much. You can turn it off if you don't want people to see the captured image. But the next part, whether you send a picture of your screen to student devices, you have the option of doing that whenever you start polling, whenever the polling ends, or you don't send a picture. That's the one I was thinking of, sorry.
okay.
And so if you want students only to see it on the Zoom screen, if they're on Zoom, or only see it in the projector, then you would choose do not send a
Do
picture
not.
of the
Okay.
screen. You also could do it just when the polling is over so they could see what the question was if they happen to be connected but not physically present. So you don't have to do that. Either one, some people automatically just do it whenever the polling starts. Some people only do it when it ends in case they weren't there, and that way they didn't get to see what the question was.
Okay.
The other thing is automatically sharing the class results. That will show a histogram of all the responses. If you're using multiple choice or multiple select, it will show you what proportion of students selected each one. I generally recommend not sending it unless you're only going to do it as a single stage poll. Because if you automatically send the results when you do a poll, as soon as the polling ends, as soon as you stop the polling, they'll see the whole range of responses. So if you wanted to
Mhm.
have them poll them and then do a think, pair, share, or have them discuss it with others and then vote again, they'd already see what were the most common votes with the automatic setting.
Got
And
it.
you can always share the results by just within the app opening the settings and going to the what the results option on the iClicker app, and that would
Right.
allow you to see it if you have a second screen. Or what some people will do is they'll open this up on, say, an iPhone or an Android phone or a tablet, and they'll be able to monitor the results from there while they're only displaying it from the main screen. So that way you could see it as it comes in, but it's not shared with students. And now the next thing is how you score results. There's two options, and you have combination possibilities. One is sometimes people just get points based on participation in the poll. That's what the top part is. And you could give whatever number of points you want tied to students just being there and answering questions. And you can do that. If you hit that drop down, you have the option of at least one question or all the questions, all but one, 75%, or at least half of the questions. So if you're going
Okay.
to use this only for participation in the polls, just to capture whether students were present and tried something, you could choose one of those.
Okay.
Alternatively, if you want to do it based on correct answers or not, then you could set that to 0 and not worry about that. I usually because the questions I'm asking in economics generally are questions where there are correct answers. And in that case, I'm going to get the scores based on whether they were correct or not, not based on whether they were present or not. But you could do a combination. You could give everyone 1 or 2 points for just being there if they answer all, for the whole class period or for 3/4 of it or whatever. And then you could also give points based on how many questions they get correct. So which do you think you'd be using? Participation, scoring points, scoring
I think
individual
participation,
questions?
yeah.
Okay, so you could just leave it at that, where this
Okay,
would just be they get 1 point for every day when they were there for, and they responded to at least 3/4 of the questions.
I like that.
And you can
Okay.
always change it, but the settings won't go into effect. You can change it in the middle of a class session. So if you decide to change it during a class, it has to be before the class starts. But that class day starts. But from then on, it will stay to the new setting, whatever you choose.
Okay.
So now,
Nice.
if you want to, will you be giving them some questions that are correct or not, or do you want to just give them credit for participation?
Um, yeah, I kind of want to make it like a, formative kind of low stakes, checks of learning kind of thing.
Well, there's a
So,
couple ways of doing it. One is just participation, and then it doesn't matter how they answer it, you know. But another way of doing it, and this is what a lot of us use, is you notice there's under individual questions, there's a points for a correct response and the number of points for responding. Um, because many of us try to do relatively challenging questions that are not obvious so that they can discuss and debate them. What we'll generally do is, well, what I do typically is I give 3 points for a response, which means they get 3 points no matter what they choose. And then I give them 2 points additional for a correct response. So that means if they answer it incorrectly, they get 3/5 or zero point 0.6. If they answer it correctly for that question, they get 5 of 5.
hmm,
So that makes it somewhat low stakes. And the way I figure it is if the questions are designed so about half of them will be correct, doing something like that would mean on average, a typical student would get a score of 80% if this was true for each and every question. Obviously some students will get 100%, some may get closer to 60%, but it keeps it low stakes. And it means that if they make some reasonable guesses, this is not going to have a very strong adverse effect. Some people will do 1 and 1, some people will do, different
hmm,
combinations, but doing something like that keeps it low stakes. So they get some points there just for answering, and they get some additional points for being correct. And now
nice. I like that.
so that way, and you can always change that later. Now, for scoring total polling sessions, this is if you want to have a fixed number of potential points each day. Most people don't do that, but you could. So if you want to have every class day be worth 10 points, you could set it, the total number of points per polling session would be 10, and it would prorate that based on the proportion of questions they got correct. Most of
Okay.
us don't. Most of us
Uh-huh.
just upload whatever score it is and do it as a percent grade in the grade book. And then, it's just an average of the percent they got or, whatever the scores happen to be each day.
Okay.
The next thing is if you're going to use free responses with correct answers, you could group responses regardless of capitalization, which just means some people will capitalize words, some won't. Leaving it at the default of no. That way, if the correct answer was, I don't know, was
Right. I'll leave it at no.
yeah, and that way it'll group them together, and you
Okay.
won't have to click as many correct responses. Now, the next thing is the timer. When we did the session earlier today, I set it as a countdown. A lot of people will use a count up, but the problem with the count up is if you're in a big class, you don't know how long it will take the last person to respond, and you
Right.
become the bad guy if you count it
Right.
off before they do it. with the countdown, they can see the counter on the screen. And if I remember correctly, it gets bigger and maybe even turns red when it gets down to 5 or 10 seconds. So it's a reminder, that of how much time they have left, and they'll see that. I usually set it at 1 minute and 30, especially the first day, because it'll
Yeah.
take some time for students to get connected if they didn't when the class started. And that way, it's usually enough time. And you can always bump it up if students say, could I have more time? Or if you see that the numbers are lower than they should be, in the app itself, while you're running it, you have the option of increasing the time. So
Okay.
I'd suggest that's a pretty good time. And if you're asking a free response that they have to think about a little more, either give them more time before you start the poll, or if you see the responses are coming in slowly, just increase the time with a little click and we can take a look at that later.
Okay.
And I think that's the last for this screen.
I think
The
so.
next one is quizzing. With this app, you have the option of doing online quizzes separate from the polling and synchronous polling. So this would be if you want to use this with an online class and set up a quiz in advance. Most people don't use this because we've got some pretty good tools for quizzing in Brightspace.
Yeah, I'd stay with Brightspace for this.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
I do too. So you don't have to do anything with that. In fact,
Okay.
I wouldn't discourage it. There's no real gain from doing this. It's just more work setting it up.
Okay.
And now, so almost everything's there. The next thing is integration, and this is where you connect to Brightspace. And so what you would do is click on Connect to Brightspace, and it's going to ask you to log into Brightspace. So go to Brightspace, and then you'll have to authenticate it, and so forth. And click OK that this is going to allow it to connect to iClicker. And
Okay.
now, if this is a fall class, it probably is not published yet.
Um,
My guess is you'd go up to the top and
oh,
probably click
it's not. Yeah.
unpublished at the top for few
Unpublished. Okay.
courses.
Yep.
So this should have your fall one. So it should be 2026 fall.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's a lot. Probably way
Uh,
down at the bottom.
at the bottom, right. Okay, so where is
Which
my
one was it?
page 82? I think I have two sections of that, so it's either, wait, it's
Oh,
probably,
that's last fall.
right. Um, that's spring. Okay, no, that's fall. Oh, I was wrong. I only have one section of that.
Okay. Yeah. And then just click next. And
Uh,
so right now you have 11 students in there.
yep.
And my guess is you were probably already logged into Brightspace. If you
I
weren't, it
was, yeah.
asked you to. Okay.
Yep.
So for people who are watching this, it will ask you to log into Brightspace. But if you already have logged in, it's fine. Then if you click connect, it's going to connect it to the course. And now what you can do is you could choose sync roster now or later. Might as well do it now.
Mm,
And now, so what this says is that you have 7 students from Brightspace already used iClicker. There's 4 students who have not ever used iClicker yet.
okay.
So most of your class have some experience with iClicker.
They can help me.
Well, it's not really hard at all.
Yeah,
And
I
so
get the
what you can
idea.
do is if
I
you
think I
click
could
view
do this.
details,
Yeah.
I think that may show the students. Yeah, it does. But just click
Yep.
select all because this isn't grade information. I think this should be safe. And then if you choose send me a copy of the email so you get it too, it's up to you. But then click send email and it will tell them that they need to connect to iClicker and it will tell them to download the app or go to the website and create their student accounts. But these are the only 4 students who need to do this. The other 7 students already have an account and have connected to the app. And now it's
There we
done.
go. So they've been
Um,
notified.
yeah,
Great.
it's asking, and yeah, it should exit out at this point, but you have to go back um, because it has sent it out. And if students add your class, it will tell you you have new students and gives you the same option of adding it. And it will also tell you if some students drop the class and then you can choose to remove them from iClicker. So it's pretty good that way when you sync it at, each use. And so now what will happen is the first time you use it in class, it will show up as a column in your gradebook. And it's going to create a column which is called iClicker grade by default. Now, scroll down just a little bit. There's just one more decision you have to make here. Now, the question is, do you want by default? I don't like the default myself, but the um, the default is it creates one column, which is a running total of of your iClicker scores. The other option is you could choose individual activity scores in separate columns. That would give you a grade from each of the days when you're using it. I personally I prefer to have it. It adds a lot more information to your grade book, but I
Yeah.
personally prefer having that. So when students say that they were in fact there and it's not showing up or their score should be higher, having it in Brightspace it will show you the date where they have no scores, and then you could go back and look and see, well, you missed this day, and this day,
Right.
or
Right.
so if you want separate columns, choose individual activity in separate columns, or you can leave it where it is. And then you just get the one column, which is their ongoing grade. It's
Ongoing
above
grade.
that part. So that next part, let's hold off on. So you can
Okay.
either have the one grade,
This
which is
one.
iClicker, or individual. Yeah, I'd recommend that
Okay.
because that way it gives you more information and it gives them more information too.
Right. The only downside is all the different columns that are now going to be in my grade book.
Yes, and
Right.
they'll all be at the end of the grade book because they'll be the last things there typically.
Okay. Okay.
And for the next time you run the course, if you roll it over, you can just do a block delete on all those, select the whole set and and remove
Right.
them. But now here's the next part is, do you want the performance points, the participation points, separate columns for each, or just the total? I would probably go with total
Yeah.
because that way it'll give you the total number of points, which includes both 1 point for being there and answering three-quarters of them, and then points based on how many you got correct. Otherwise, if you choose both performance points and participation, it would double the number of extra columns you get.
Okay. I'll go with total. Right.
And then the next thing is you could set it up so that students who did not reply get a score of 0 or just receive a blank. I usually assign a score of 0. Now, if they
Yeah.
haven't registered or they messed up the registration or they signed up for the wrong class, those zeros are a good reminder to students to fix it. And then you can always resync it later and it will replace the zeros with something else. But personally, I
Okay.
like students to see a 0 because if they see something missing, but it's not being computed as a 0, it'll inflate the grade. It'll make the grade look higher than it is if you're assigning some score or some weight to these.
Right. Okay. I'm going to keep it as 0 as well.
And then the last thing is what it calls, what it calls it. It could be iClicker attendance or it could be iClicker scores or whatever you want it to be, but it will create a column in gradebook that it uses and then it will do it for each day when you're doing that.
Okay.
And the points possible would be basically the percent scores for each.
Right.
And now you're pretty much
And
done.
that's it.
So
Yeah.
now just click save and
And
it's all set
where
up
did
and
my
you would
save
just go
is?
in and load the app.
Okay.
And then from then on, what you would do is you would load the iClicker software either on your own computer or a Podium computer. And if you have that handy, we could just go through it quickly. We won't actually run anything because that would show up as your first class day there. Um,
Okay. I think I had it. Oh, I got a lot of things on my screen right now. Um, how do I move that? Okay. I thought I had it. There it is. I have to sign in. Oop. I guess I haven't signed into this one before. Uh,
Well, since you only have the one class, it might be easier. Let me share my screen and
okay,
then I can show it because I don't have my fall class set up, so I can
yeah,
do it
sure.
without adding additional columns. Because one of the things I have done one of the things I learned not to do is not to demo from a live class. Um, you may want to create like a dummy class just to practice with. But let me load iClicker, and it should pop up any second. And it's on my other screen, buried under a whole bunch of tabs, it looks like. Um, and why am I not seeing it? 1 second. Here we go. So I'm going to sign in. Oh, and because this is not the account I normally use, I have to log in. So when you go into a classroom or if it's on your device, you have to log in. Now, if it's on your own device, it'll save that. Um, and well, I can remember me on this computer because I'll be the person using it most of the time. Okay. And so let's say we're doing a CELT class. That's what we had used before. The other is my one of my spring classes. And where did the app go? Oh, here. It got buried. And this is what it would look like typically. So when you're ready to use it, you just so you can shrink it if it gets in the way, expand it. When you want to start a poll, you just click poll and then you choose the type of question you want. Let's say we're doing a multiple choice question, which is probably the most common, or that and free response. Start the poll. It's automatically captured this desktop. Now, normally there'd be a question there in PowerPoint or in Google Slides or whatever you're using, but it could be Word. It could be anything where you put a question on the screen. Some people have even done it on the fly using Notepad or Notes or something similar. And then once you're finished, you'll see the number of responses here. You can see the results here, although you generally wouldn't show students while they're doing it. And then you stop it when it's done. And then you could see the results on another screen if you have it or on another device that have students perhaps do it again, depending on the question and how it looks. And then once you're ready to share the results, you just click here and it will display a histogram. And to mark a question as correct, you can either do it later, or if choice A was correct, you just click it and it will turn it green, or in this case, it'll give you a check mark. You normally see a multicolored histogram there.
Okay.
And you could also copy this and store it on another screen if you want to, if you want to monitor the results as they come in. And that's something that I tend to do. And then when you're finished, all you have to do is just go back and choose exit. Couple other things here. You could use it with groups. That's less common. You could hide the timer or turn reactions on and off if you want. And you could also check the roster and so on. You probably wouldn't do that in class much. The quiz is that thing that you'd use outside of class. Mostly what you would do though is you would just, once you're finished, oh, one other thing. While you're in the poll, you have some options. You could, if you don't want to count something and you want students to respond about how they think the class is going or with any suggestions on what could make the class more effective, you can set it to be anonymous. If you want to switch from a count down to a count up, you could just click on that and toggle it. You could also turn on a confidence rating where it will give students the option of not just selecting an answer, but rating their confidence. And that's good to do. Students got tired of it when I did that more than a couple of days because it was one more question, and I do quite a few of them in class. So they preferred to turn that off. But it's not a bad strategy, especially if you're only doing a few questions. And when you're finished, just go here and click end. And then you can, if you want, it will give a little exit poll, a little 1 minute quiz type of thing, asking students how it went and, for any questions or concerns they have, which you can get a summary of later, or you could just choose end class. And once you do that, the next thing you would do is you would go into iClicker on the web and have it sync the data. We're not going to show that because I only have live classes with real students in it, but you would sync the data. It would pull in any new students and it would tell you if any students have deleted. And after the first week or two, that tends to stabilize pretty quickly. And then we may get a few drops late in the semester, especially if you got, 200 or 300 students. But one of the options there is you would have the option of syncing with the gradebook. And if you choose sync to the gradebook, it will take all the scores and copy them over to the next gradebook column, which would be flagged by the session number. And I think it also includes as a subcategory the date of the items. And then it just uploads the grades and you're almost done. The only other thing you'll have to do in Brightspace is you create a gradebook category for iClicker scores or iClicker attendance or whatever that was, whatever,
Mhm.
however you defined it. And then each day when you upload, each class day when you upload new scores, you'd go into your gradebook, you'd choose manage, and then the gradebook scores would not be attached to any category. So you create that category, and then you would go in and edit the grades that you just uploaded and assign it to the gradebook category with whatever percentage weight you have assigned to it. So, if you wanted to make it
Yeah.
10%,
Okay.
15%, it'll automatically do that. But you do have to each day add to it. It just takes a couple minutes to do. So,
Excellent.
and that's pretty much it.
That's it. Yeah. Um, this is going to be good. I
And
like
if you
this a
have any
lot.
questions, just let me know.
I will. I
You
will.
know where I am.
Thank you, John. I
You're
appreciate all
welcome.
your work you've been doing for the breakout sessions. I know it's a lot, but I'm
No,
definitely gonna start using this. Yeah,
students tend to really like it. And
good.
I mean, most faculty really like it too, because it gives you that real-time feedback on how students are doing, which is kind
Yeah,
of nice.
I like it. I tend to ask questions, and you know how that is. There's always the kid in the front row who's answering all the questions, and everyone else is just kind of hanging out. And you know, I know some of them know the answer, and I don't really want to call them out unless they see their hand up. And this way everybody can get a chance to be involved. And I think I'm going to do a lot more of this than what I have been doing with, hey, let's talk a
And
little bit. Let's do a review. What did we just,
And exactly for the reasons you said, this
yeah,
is really beneficial. It makes
yeah,
it more equitable. You get to hear from all the students, not just the one, the 3 or 4
right.
students who always want to
The
answer. You
extroverts.
get and it also feels anonymous. Even when the grades are being recorded, they're not being publicly shown whether they're right or wrong. So they know whether they were right or wrong. Each individual student knows, but it's not like a public humiliation in some way
Right,
for getting
right,
the wrong
right,
answer. We want to
right,
discourage students from thinking that, but they don't mind getting something wrong if it's not clear to everybody that they got it
right,
wrong.
right.
So it's
Okay.
and one other thing, shortly after I started this was a webinar sponsored by iClicker where they had a session on using it in small classes of like 10 to 15 students. And it was the same argument that, even in a class of 10 students, there's going to be some students who always want to answer, and there's other students who are just kind of shy, who are a little more introverted, who aren't as comfortable answering.
Yep.
And when you hear from one student, even in a small class, you don't know if that one student is the only one who understood it or the only student who didn't understand it. And it's nice to
Right,
have that whole mix all the
right,
time.
right. Excellent.
So,
Thank you,
okay.
John.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to enjoy using it. So,
Good.
all right. I will
Okay.
see you. I don't think I have anything tomorrow, but I'll be back on Thursday, I think, for some of the sessions coming up.
I'll be here. Yeah. On
Yeah.
Thursday, 2 of the sessions, one is we got